however surprised we might have been as a country when that happened in January 2021. The American right wing had been showing us for months all over the country that that's the way they plan to operate from here on out. I mean, in 2020, they sent armed mobs out to government sites in Michigan, in Idaho, in Pennsylvania, in Oregon, in Arizona, in Georgia, you name it. And they sent them into state capitals. They sent them to the offices of statewide officials. They sent them to the homes of statewide officials, always with guns, always with force. And now, even as the national expression of this tactic in Washington, D.C., January 6, 2021, even as that has been successfully adjudicated in federal court as an act of sedition, and as upwards of 1,000 people have been criminally charged for their participation in, again, the national version of this tactic from January 6, 2021, now we are starting to see how this looks when this American right-wing tactic gets translated into foreign languages and foreign countries. It was only last month when German police arrested more than 24 people who they say were planning a similar armed right-wing attack on the German parliament. They were well armed. They were fairly well connected. One former member of parliament from a right-wing party was among those arrested. It was thought that her access to the parliament building as a former member might have been used to get these armed attackers inside the Reichstag on the day of their planned assault. Now, this month, it's Brazil, where Trumpy right-wing former President Jair Bolsonaro lost his bid for re-election on the last day of October. The time frame is almost exactly the same from when Trump lost re-election in early November 2020, and then his supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol the first week of January. Bolsonaro lost re-election the last day of October, and now his supporters have attacked the national capital the first week of January as well. Bolsonaro, like Trump, said in advance of the presidential election that the election was rigged, that the only way he could lose is through fraud. Like Trump, Bolsonaro said in advance that he would only accept the election's results if he won. Like Trump, Bolsonaro then lost, and like Trump, Bolsonaro then refused to concede. He also refused to go to his successor's inauguration, just like Trump did. When Bolsonaro's supporters attacked their national capital yesterday, it was like watching a Southern Hemisphere summer performance of the January 6th attack. The images and videos coming out of the Brazilian capital were so uncannily similar to what we saw here at home. And the pro-Bolsonaro mob attacked journalists and stole and smashed journalists' equipment, just as the pro-Trump mob did on January 6th. The Bolsonaro mob used police barricades as battering rams. They attacked police officers in bloody hand-to-hand combat. They ransacked the offices of members of the Brazilian government. They took selfies and posed in government chambers. Just like Trump did, Bolsonaro waited silently for hours as the attack was underway. He only put out a statement calling for peace once the security forces had regained control of the Capitol and repelled the invasion. Bolsonaro's family and supporters, just like Trump's, soon started claiming that it wasn't them at all who attacked the Capitol. It was bad guys. It was left-wingers. It was Antifa, criminals dressed up like Bolsonaro's supporters. It wasn't really Bolsonaro's supporters who did all of this ransacking and who trashed the Capitol. I mean, the parallels are so tight, it's almost stupid. It almost just seems like reading the same script in a different language. And seeing, English language hashtags trending online about the attack, seeing English language signs at the attack in a country where they speak Portuguese, not English. I mean, it tells you something about how this may be more than just inspired by what happened here in our own right-wing attempt at a violent government overthrow. But there's also some important differences. Like, for example, in Brazil, they actually arrested people on the day of the attack. More than 1,000 people arrested yesterday, unlike our own Capitol attack on January 6th, in which almost no one was arrested until well after it was all over and most of the attackers had gone home. In Brazil's case, they've got more than 1,000 people in custody today from yesterday's attack. Also, in Brazil's case, they launched this attack a week after the transfer of power had already happened. not before the transfer of power like happened with the Trump supporters in D.C. Because the new president of Brazil has already been sworn in and Bolsonaro is already an ex-president, that has all sorts of implications for the former president, Bolsonaro, and whether he's going to be held responsible for what his followers just did. Bolsonaro, bizarrely, is in Florida right now. Since the day that he left office, he has been staying at a weird little suburban McMansion near Disney World, which he rented from a mixed martial arts fighter. Okay. The State Department spent today fending off requests from reporters about what exactly Bolsonaro is doing here. Is he here to try to avoid prosecution on the numerous corruption probes and other forms of criminal investigations that he's facing in Brazil? The State Department is fending off questions today about, what kind of visa Bolsonaro's on and what's going to happen if, in fact, he faces charges at home and Brazil asks the United States to extradite him to face trial there. We're also tonight learning that, even more weirdly, the official in the Brazilian government who is the security chief specifically responsible for security in Brasilia, in their national capital, he was also in Florida at the time the attack on the Capitol happened this weekend. He has since been fired from the Brazilian government as of today. What was he doing in Florida when the attack took place? Why is he still there now? We have a lot of challenges. But on top of it all, we now need to contend with the fact that at least Florida appears to be developing as a refuge for would-be dictators for whom the violent efforts of their supporters were not quite enough to keep them in power. Florida is apparently lousy with that kind of overripe fruit right now. And we need to contend with the fact that whether or not the world still sees us as a beacon of democracy, a city on a hill, the far right around the world apparently now sees our far right as a model for violent mass attack against the institutions of government. I mean, as Americans, we take great pride in leading the world in lots of things. We do not take great pride in this.